Welcome back to Chestnut Week at the Pennsylvania Farm Show. I'm Jim Searing, president of the Pennsylvania and New Jersey chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation. I'm your host for this series, which is designed to inform and update everybody on the quest to save the American chestnut and restore it to our homes, our farms, our fields, and our forests. We're featuring an array of experts on growing, restoring, and finding chestnuts in our region, and we're really glad you joined us tonight. I call this the night shift. We're here at the virtual PA Farm Show experience. This screen behind me is the display we bring to the farm show every year, where we normally engage with thousands of people. We look forward to next year when hopefully we will see you all in person and online like we're doing now. Before we start our program, there's a few things you need to know. First, the program's being recorded. We expect over time to have this on YouTube and on our website so people could reference it. And that includes anything you put into questions and answers or the chat. Secondly, we will mute everyone except for the presenters. And we've set the Zoom event up so that no one can see your screen. And lastly, we will not be surprising anyone by calling on individuals. We will have time for questions after our conversation. So if you have one, please enter it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. There's also a chat section, but we will not be monitoring it for questions. That's really what the Q&A box is for. And if we don't have time to get to all your questions, we will try to come back to you with an email response. And incidentally, regarding the chat, it's really fun when our audience lets us know where you're from in the chat box. So with that, let's get into our program. This week is a whole series of discussions. So many of these discussions are focused on the plight of the American chestnut. At one time, American chestnut made up as much as 1 in 4 trees in some parts of the eastern United States. When a blight was introduced from Asia in 1904, some 3 or 4 billion trees were wiped out. This was one of the most devastating environmental disasters in modern history, and it really foretold much of what we're seeing today in so many other trees as they battle pests and diseases. The American Chestnut Foundation, or TACF for short, was formed to find a way to save the tree and restore what was lost. Today, this effort to save the American chestnut is considered one of the most ambitious ecological restoration programs in the world. So we share an appreciation of trees and forests with another community that plays a similar and complementary role, with farmers who are growing chestnuts commercially for culinary purposes. These farmers are a small but very dedicated group bringing chestnuts back to our local markets. Nationally, they comprise about 1,000 farms producing chestnuts on about 4,000 acres. And their farms are mostly in Michigan, Florida, interestingly enough, California and Oregon, and Virginia. And less than 5 are in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Yet 50 miles from the Pennsylvania-Ohio border, over in Ohio, Amy Miller is working with Route 9 Cooperative with substantial orchards and selling out their chestnuts within a few weeks each year. Amy's so engaged in the topic that she's pursuing a doctorate in plant pathology at Ohio State. So Amy, good evening and welcome to Chestnut Week. Thanks for bringing
Good evening. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for bringing a fireside chat aspect to us.
Absolutely.
So let me start by asking, why do you think there's so few chestnut farms in the United States? And what possessed your family to defy convention and start a chestnut farm? They could have started a hazelnut farm, a walnut farm. I think back to Best in Show when they lay out all the different nuts. So what possessed your family to get into this?
Yeah, those are some really good questions. So to start with your first question, as far as like why are there so few chestnut farms in the U.S.? That's probably has a really complicated answer. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. I think the main thing is to have a successful chestnut farm, you need three main attributes. You need to have the right site, the right genetic material to plant, and then the right person, with the right kind of background and dedication and patience to actually to farm chestnuts. And I think since the loss of the American chestnut, growers, especially in the eastern U.S., like people have really struggled to put all those three things together. Something that's been lacking tremendously, kind of in the early 20th century, kind of mid 1900s, after the chestnut blight, and when people were planting culinary chestnuts, they didn't have really good genetic material that was suited to the sites in the eastern U.S. And over time, we have now developed a really nice germplasm of nuts and trees that can be grown on the right soils in the eastern U.S. And actually, chestnut farming is becoming much more popular now. There are a lot of young orchards, new orchards that are going into production. So there's been this kind of gap, a void of a lot of chestnut farms, but I think that might change in the near future. And as far as my family, I like that you use the term defy convention. That's pretty interesting because yeah, there are people that did defy convention. um, the two farms that my family owns were started by my grandfather, Jay Miller, and he grew up on a dairy farm. And I actually never got to know him. He died when I was a baby, so I never really knew him. I only know him from stories. But apparently, what I gather is Jay Miller did not like dairy farming. So after he came home from World War II, he did not go back to the family farm. He started a factory job. And not only did he not want to go to the family dairy farm, his dream was to buy old abandoned dairy farms and plant nut trees on them. so that's what he did. He purchased two abandoned dairy farms in Carroll County, Ohio. And he was a member of the Northern Nut Growers Association. And so he had access to lots of different types of nut trees through the NNGA.
Right.
And he actually planted lots of different nut trees. And he wasn't really thinking about business in particular. He just wanted to grow nut trees as a hobby. And so kind of over time, what he saw was the chestnut trees did way better than anything else. They did better than the walnuts he planted. They did better than the hazels he planted. All the other things, the chestnuts really did well at this particular site. So he listened to the land and decided he wanted to plant more chestnut trees. And my parents then, my father, after pursuing his Ph.D. in forest genetics, and my mother, she pursued a Ph.D. in horticulture. They actually came to the farm. And my dad, despite having a doctorate and thinking about going into academia, decided to be a chestnut farmer and defied convention that way. And my mother was actually kind of the breadwinner of the family while my father was starting the chestnut orchard, like the business aspect of it. So that was another thing that defied convention, where, she was the first woman faculty member in her department. And anyway, so they kind of had this unusual arrangement where she worked for Ohio State University and he became a chestnut farmer. And so now here I am, the third generation chestnut grower on this site. And, I've got a wonderful legacy ahead of me, and it's been really fun to grow and learn and develop this crop over the years, and, plan to keep doing it.
That's a wonderful story. I'm just curious. So your grandfather planted planted many different trees, and then he found that chestnuts work the best. What did other farmers around them then follow that lead, or what kind of made your area? I won't call it Chestnut Central, but a hotbed of chestnut farming.
Yeah. So it did so happen that so we're on a very favorable soil type to chestnuts. We've got farms on two different ridges that are a sandy loam soil that the chestnuts love. And there was actually a coal mining company who strip mined the area And after the mining, they still own the land. And so somehow they got it in their minds that they wanted to plant chestnuts. So they actually bought trees from my father and planted chestnuts on a lot of the neighboring properties.
I
And then
see.
over time, as the coal mining companies sold the land to other growers or to other landowners, then they became chestnut growers by default.
So success bred success.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Okay. What kind of chestnuts? What kind of chestnuts do you grow, and what kind of yields come off of a fully grown tree?
So as far as our culinary nut production, we sell almost exclusively Chinese chestnuts. So we have, a lot of seedling trees that we've picked out as some of the best, and we've propagated those, and we've grown seedlings from them. So we sell mostly Chinese chestnuts. We also have, for research purposes and for interest, we have a bunch of different types of hybrids and different types of Castanea species that'll grow here. And as far as like for seeds and nursery trees, we do sell other species as well. But the main nut production is from the Chinese chestnuts.
I see. And when you say hybrids, are they hybrid of one variety of Chinese and another, or is it a cross with American or with European or with Japanese chestnut?
Yeah, we have a variety of things actually. So yeah, we have some that are various versions of American Chinese hybrids. We have some with Japanese or European in
I
them.
see.
A lot of them are kind of complex hybrids. So it's not necessarily a 50-50, but something with a complex ancestry.
Got it. Do you have any viewpoints about the best cultivars, or is it situational based on site and
Yeah,
latitude?
it does. It is kind of site specific. It's got. I'll borrow a line from my dad, and whenever people ask him what's the best cultivar, he says, "Well, if we knew that, we'd only be selling that one." Nobody wants the second best, right? So we're still developing different cultivars and trying different cultivars, and what works best for a particular site in a particular geographic area. Um, you know, growers have to kind of figure that out for themselves.
Okay. So I noticed as I was getting ready for this that there's a cold hardy chestnut cultivar named Amy. Is that you?
Yeah.
And if so, how did that come about?
Yeah, that is named after me. um, so this was a seedling. It's on the Ortet. The original tree is still on one of our farms, and this is part of a seedling block that was planted by my dad and my grandfather. They picked some of the best trees that they had growing, planted the seeds from them, and then selected this one cultivar called Amy. Well, out of the block, it had a number. And when my dad went to register it as a cultivar with the official cultivar registry, the registrar said, "Well, it can't be a number. It's got to have a name." And he said, "Oh, I don't know what to name it." And she said, "Name it after one of your children." so, so he chose to name it after me. I'm the oldest kid in the family, so makes sense.
I've always wondered how do you get one of these things named after you? So that's fascinating. So tell us about the Route 9 Cooperative, and why do chestnut farmers band together into cooperatives? Why that form?
Yeah. So yeah, we started Route 9 Cooperative. It was actually about 10 years ago now. 2010 was our first season. So we've just had our 10th season as a cooperative. And it's worked out really well for us. And I think the cooperative farm model is a really good one for chestnut farmers, chestnut growers, because a cooperative allows you to have the economy of scale of a large business, even if you're a small grower. So, if all of our landowners were to, have to market the nuts themselves, harvest the nuts, all the processing equipment, everything that it takes to take the nut from field, to customer, it would be overwhelming. And if you're kind of a small grower, you're not going to make that big investment. But with a cooperative, the co-op can provide all of that harvest and marketing infrastructure, and then the grower can choose kind of their level of participation. In our cooperative in particular, my father, Greg, and we're pretty active, in all aspects of the chestnut, from field to harvest, but other growers are absentee landowners. So
Hmm.
they don't necessarily have to be out there every day tending their trees. If there's something that needs done, like for example, spraying for weevils, they can contract the cooperative to do that. And then the co-op just deducts the cost of that spraying from the final payout at the end of the season. So growers can kind of choose, and they have some flexibility in how involved they are in the process, and it gives their chestnuts value that they wouldn't have otherwise. So the co-op model is really good for chestnuts and other small specialty crops as well.
Does the co-op have employees? Does it
Yes.
have contractors, or does it have employees normally?
Some of each, yeah. So there are a few employees each year that kind of manage the harvest, as far as like bringing nuts in from the field and kind of processing, packing, shipping. And
Yes.
then we pay. So all of our harvesting is done by hand, and our chestnut pickers are contractors. And sometimes we'll contract particular like tractor work, or there are other things that we can contract as needed too.
What's the secret? How do chestnut harvesters protect their hands?
Well, the Chinese chestnuts actually, for the most part, when they're ready, when they're ripe, the burrs split open and the nuts fall out onto the ground, and then the burrs fall, which is a bit different. American chestnuts tend to hang on to their burrs much tighter. So the Chinese chestnuts, the nuts fall to the ground, the burrs tend to fall separately. So actually, a person can pick up chestnuts just with bare hands pretty easily. And it's much faster to use your bare hands than to try to use gloves, just because your fingers are so clunky in gloves. Some people use those like roller, like nut weasel, nut wizard things too. That's another
Yes.
option.
Wow. So when I entered this, I thought, okay, a cooperative would be the capital equipment and the processing equipment. But what you're saying is this cooperative will, in effect, the landowners can outsource the whole maintenance and cultivation of the plants.
Yeah, we have it set up that way. Yeah, we have it set up to where the landowners, they can, the co-op hires the pickers. Now, if a landowner chooses, they could hire their own pickers. They could take care of that themselves, but they don't have to. They can just have the cooperative do that. And we have 4 contiguous landowners who just basically use the cooperative system to do everything.
I see.
Mhm.
And what kinds? So you sell chestnuts. What other things do you sell?
That's really about it. Chestnut. We sell fresh culinary chestnuts. We sell dried products, so dried chestnut kernels and also chestnut flour. And then we sell nursery stock. So we sell chestnuts for seed, like the people want to plant them,
Right.
and we sell trees, mostly bare root seedlings, some container trees. So yeah, pretty much anything that's chestnut, we sell it.
How far do you ship? Can it go anywhere, or is it basically a very regional thing?
Yeah, we ship all over. In fact, we would probably ship to every single state in the U.S. if we were allowed. There are some agricultural quarantines on the West Coast, so we don't ship any fresh nuts or plant material to the West Coast. But we have customers all over the U.S., including Alaska, and I think we even sent some to Hawaii this year.
Chestnuts.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm curious, do you have a sense of the market for chestnuts? A lot of chestnuts, millions of pounds of chestnuts are imported from Europe and Asia. I'm curious, what kind of market is there for domestic chestnuts? Domestically grown.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. The market for domestic chestnuts is really good. Um, Apparently, importing chestnuts must be a big logistical issue, because almost all of the chestnuts that arrive that are imported are in really bad quality. They're not handled properly. They're not stored properly. They're not displayed properly by the supermarkets. So by the time they get to the consumers, they're really not very good. That's some of the worst kept produce that you'll ever see in a grocery store are chestnuts. And our customers know that. And so our customers, people who eat chestnuts regularly, they prefer domestic chestnuts. They want them fresh. They want the good quality. And so really the market for domestic chestnuts is it's certainly unsaturated, far from being saturated at this point in time.
So those nuts that are stored, by the potatoes and the onions and all that good stuff in the supermarkets, that's not a good idea.
No, chestnuts they're really different than other nuts, and they're handled best. I always tell people, think of chestnuts like carrots. Handle them as you would vegetables, such as a carrot, instead of like a nut. They need to be kept. They're best stored if they're kept moist and they're kept refrigerated. As long as they're fresh and moist, they have some natural abilities to keep away like storage rots and fungus.
Right.
But as soon as they dry out, then they're subject to lots of different storage molds and issues. So yeah, treat them more like a carrot than like a walnut, for example.
That's good advice for us as consumers, because
Yeah,
I
right.
never see a spray device, over where chestnuts are being sold.
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's an issue. Yeah.
So chestnut farming, we do a lot of orchard work, and of course, we had Steve Hoy on earlier today, and he's constantly dealing with issues that Mother Nature throws at us. What do you see as the biggest challenges to be a commercial chestnut farmer?
Yeah, there are always issues. I mean, anybody who farms anything knows that, right? It'd be no surprise to people at the PA Farm Show. So as far as having a successful commercial chestnut operation, it really starts with the soil, with the site. Healthier trees, trees that are growing more vigorously, that are in optimal site conditions, are going to be naturally more resistant to different pests and diseases and issues. So we always tell growers, anyone who wants to plant, start off with the right site, and you minimize the stresses down the road. And so getting that soil type right is really critical. And then beyond that, of course, there's kind of the weather surprises of the year, which none of us can control, but we sort of have to deal with. And then, managing pests and disease, chestnut weevils in particular are a big issue for commercial chestnut growers. If left unmanaged, weevils can ruin an entire crop. So, you can have a million chestnuts on the ground that look really beautiful from the outside, but if they have weevils inside, they're not sellable. You don't have anything for the consumer. So, weevil control is an issue once you get that orchard well established.
I'll come back to that in a minute. I'm quite curious about that, particularly because you're studying plant pathology at Ohio State. Let me just ask: are there? You've got a couple of different ways Route 9 has a couple of different ways to earn income. Does anybody do intercropping with chestnut orchards, or is that out of bounds? Can you grow wheat, for instance?
Oh, that's a good question.
The tree?
Yeah, so that's an area that really, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to really study the best types of intercropping systems. We have never done or like purposely pursued intercropping, just because we've had mature trees in production for such a long time that our trees produce enough that they sustain us. New growers that are just starting out, that are planting young trees and need to somehow earn income in the meantime until the 10 years it takes for their crop to get into production, should definitely, investigate some options. One thing that we've thought of is brambles, because brambles are kind of an ephemeral crop anyway. You could interplant brambles between chestnut trees, and about the time the chestnuts would be large and be shading the brambles and be coming into production, the brambles would be so full of disease and issues anyway that you'd want to take them out. So that's something that could work out really well timing wise. Growers in our cooperative have had success, not necessarily intercropping, but having other crops maybe in other areas until the chestnuts establish. Bob Staley of Wintergreen Tree Farm, who's a member of our cooperative, he grows blueberries and Christmas trees. And so the blueberries and Christmas trees kind of gave him income while his chestnuts were getting established. And he still sells all those things, but he's played around with different crops in different locations to make it all make economic sense.
So I guess there's an issue of spacing when people are doing that, right? That would be part of the planning process. How
Right.
much space between the trees and everything. Yes.
Mhm.
So I have to just admit ignorance. When you say brambles, what is I'm sorry, I kind of know what they are from climbing through the woods, but what is the significance from a farming perspective? What,
So things like raspberries and blackberries.
oh,
Raspberries, blackberries. You could even throw in like currants or elderberries, other types of berry crops. So the bramble, like fresh, like pick your own berries, is a pretty big industry, or could potentially a pretty big industry. There are lots of farms in Ohio, in particular, that have pretty successful small scale pick your own bramble operations. So that is why it would be something that might be economical for a chestnut farmer, provide some income while the trees are growing, and the brambles and chestnuts have similar site requirements.
I see. Okay. If I'm a chestnut farmer, when would I take vacation? What time of year do I get to relax?
Yeah. um, so I would say this time of year, January, it's the slowest time of the season. We do still work on our dried products throughout the winter. So we will dry and peel chestnuts. We have a special peeling machine actually that is kind of invented by Greg here at our operation. And so we do work on that this time of year, but pretty much the month of January is slow. The culinary season is finished. The seed nut season is finished. The nursery trees haven't started yet. This is the downtime.
Okay, good to know. So we talked a little bit about weevils. I'm just curious, chestnuts are like one of the most, I'll use the term generous for nature, for wildlife, the deer. It feels like every critter known to exist loves some aspect of chestnuts, bugs, microorganisms. So what are the most common pests and diseases? And, are there do we have effective ways to treat them?
Yeah, so you're right in saying that. I mean, chestnuts are like the chestnut orchard is an ecological reef. I mean, there are all kinds of different organisms that live out in the orchard, and that's something I really enjoy about it. It's fun to walk out in the orchard in this basically a farm field that's producing food, but yet you can watch all different types of birds and mammals. Some you like, some you don't. Certainly like all these different types of mushrooms, and anyway, so it is really special in the ecosystem that the chestnut trees provide. As far as pests and disease, so the major ones, of course, especially people associated with TACF, when you think of chestnut disease, you think of chestnut blight and Phytophthora,
Right.
which are definitely serious considerations. But in our case, we're planting Chinese chestnuts on really good sites, and so our trees are mostly resistant to both of those diseases. So those aren't issues that we really have to worry about. Even though blight is present, it's Chinese trees are mostly resistant to it. The two biggest diseases that we have to deal with are oak wilt and a kernel disease called blossom end rot. And the oak wilt, that's a pretty serious. All of our member orchards have issues with oak wilt. So it crosses over from oak trees. Oak trees and chestnut trees are closely related. So there are definitely some pests and diseases that cross over between oak species and chestnut species. And oak wilt acts very much like Dutch elm disease, and it can kill the entire tree in the season. Yeah, yeah, pretty devastating. So that's something that we've been dealing with. We've been following the forestry guidelines that that recommend trenching around infected trees, because the trees first become infected by spores brought by a beetle. But once a tree is infected, it can actually transfer the fungus through the roots to trees nearby. The trees tend to root graft, so the roots will be actually actually grown together. Right. And so the fungus can move from one to the other. So by severing that connection, then hopefully you can stop the spread from one tree to another. So we're working on dealing with that, which is a serious issue. And then the other one I mentioned was blossom end rot, which is a disease. It's called blossom end rot because it affects the very tip of the kernel, kind of the blossom end where the flower was. And people hear that and they think, oh, blossom end rot like tomato. Totally different, same name, totally different disease. The blossom end rot in chestnut is caused by a fungus, and that's actually the main focus of my studies at Ohio State University. This is kind of an emerging disease. It's something we've had, but in recent years, it's gotten really bad to the point where we need to do something about it, but we don't know what. So I'm working on studying some of the basic biology, the life cycle of the pathogen, and trying to figure out at what points in time we might be able to treat it. It's not like, I mean, because the chestnuts are concealed inside the burrs, you can't really just spray them and it'll go away because it's inside the nut, inside the burr. So that's definitely a challenge for many growers in the Eastern US, not just us.
Wow. Sounds very timely what you're studying.
Yeah.
So let's take a break for a sec. And then I'll ask maybe two more questions and then we'll go to the questions from the audience. If any of our listeners today would like to join us at the American Chestnut Foundation, go to www.acf.org and click on the membership tab. Members will receive our monthly newsletter, TACF's Chestnut Magazine 3 times a year, invitation to our spring growers and fall meetings, volunteer opportunities, and have access to chestnut seeds, weather permitting. Plus, you get to meet people who are pursuing something larger than ourselves, and that will span several generations. This year, our chapter is throwing in an additional incentive. Any new members who join the Pennsylvania, New Jersey chapter in January will automatically be entered in a drawing to win 6 pints of ice cream of your choice from the beloved Penn State Berkey Creamery. The creamery is located about 2 minutes from our headquarters office at Penn State and about 10 minutes from our chestnut orchard. And when people visit with us, they usually find their way over to that creamery. So Amy, let me just ask, so what are the best sources of information and knowledge for people that are farming or for that matter, growing chestnuts?
Yeah, this is a really great question and a really important question because unfortunately there's quite a lot of misinformation out in the world about chestnuts. If you Google simple questions about chestnut production or chestnut management, you will find some really good information and you will find some downright wrong information. And there's really no good way to separate those if you're just a novice starting out and you don't know one way or the other. So when you're seeking out good chestnut information, it's actually really important to connect with growers through some of these groups like TACF and the Northern Nut Growers Association and the Chestnut Growers of America. I really can't stress that enough. And I highly recommend if you're interested in culinary chestnuts, whether it be it's just a few backyard trees or like a small orchard. I highly recommend membership in the NNGA, the Northern Nut Growers Association, because they have over 100-year history of people growing nut trees in North America. And there's just a wealth of information and resources there. And you're getting good information from that group. Whereas, if you're just kind of blindly searching Google or YouTube, there's just, unfortunately, there's a lot of garbage out there. There's good stuff too, but it's hard to sift through it all.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so let me ask, what advice would you give a landowner in your neighboring state of Pennsylvania or our neighboring state of New Jersey or in the region who was considering converting some of their acreage to a commercial chestnut farm? What advice would you give to them?
I would definitely start with a soil test. As I mentioned before, chestnuts are highly site sensitive. And so, if you have an optimal site, which throughout PA and New Jersey and, New York, Ohio, I mean, in this region, we have a lot of really good chestnut sites. So chances are you might have a good chestnut site. If you have a good chestnut site, you can really be successful. If you don't have a good chestnut site, you're just going to be fighting your environment the whole time. You're going to have more pest and disease issues than you need. Your trees aren't going to do very well. If you don't have well-drained sandy soil with low pH, plant something else. There are plenty of other wonderful trees that you can plant in higher pH soils.
Or plant a variety like your grandfather did and see what works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he didn't do a soil test. He just planted the trees and figured out what worked and what didn't. If you have the time, that's one way of doing it.
Darwinian approach.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask some questions from the audience. So Steve asks, are you doing anything with Chinka pins?
Yes. Yeah. I guess I didn't mention them, but we do grow Chinka pins. We sell Chinka pin seeds. Chinka pins they're really finicky. They're really difficult to grow, like on a commercial scale. They're a great wildlife tree. It's a good native landscaping kind of backyard tree. But yeah, they have their own challenges.
Even though they're related, right? I mean, they're related to chestnuts.
Yeah.
Yes, but they're much smaller also.
They're smaller. Yeah, they tend to be one nut per burr, and the burrs are in clusters, and they grow as more of a shrub than a tree.
Oh, okay. So Steve asked a follow-up question. He goes, and I'm not sure what. Here's his question: what is the status of seed or plant material for sale? So
I assume he means from Route 9. We are sold out of seed. We had quite a lot of seed orders this year, but we do have bare root nursery stock available that we can ship this spring. We're not shipping currently because of the cold weather, but we will have nursery stock available this spring. You can check out our website, route9cooperative.com, and you can order trees from there. We have mostly Chinese bare root, probably also some Chinka pins. I don't know, contact Greg. So as far as the division of labor goes, I manage a lot of the culinary chestnut things, and then Greg manages a lot of the nursery stock, like those seeds and trees. So contact Greg, he'll sort you out.
Excellent. Mike asks this question: you're in zone 5, correct? Question mark. Could you please discuss frost damage, winter kill, and those kinds of problems?
Yeah, so we don't really often have winter issues where we are. So we've never really, winter has never really been a problem for us. I'm not sure if that's because of the seeds that or the trees that my grandfather and father selected over the years, or what, or if it's just we're just mild enough that it's not an issue. But we definitely talk to a lot of people who are in more northern areas and have frost issues. Now, that being said, this last year in 2020, we had a big freeze event that hurt a bunch of trees and really damaged our crop, and that was kind of a once in a 30-year type of experience for us.
I see. Okay. So another question is, have you determined an optimal spacing in your orchards?
Yeah, this is a really common question, planting spacing. And this is one of those things you'll find all kinds of answers on the internet. So we recommend 20 feet by 40 foot spacing. Our oldest orchards, the trees are at 40 foot by 40 foot. So they've been thinned to that spacing. We personally find that a 20 foot by 40 foot, it gets the trees going, and it does give you opportunity if you wanted to intercrop something in the meantime, and then you end up not having to thin very many trees later on. Other people plant much denser to start with, but then they end up having to thin more trees over time. So you can plant a denser orchard, get more production sooner, but then you have to get rid of more trees, or you can do what we do, which is plant a little bit wider spacing and you don't have to thin as much over time.
I see. I have to ask, so I assume you use fertilizer at times on your trees. Maybe that's a bad assumption. I'm curious whether you can see changes in production and whether you can exhaust a tree if it's given too much stimulation, or is the yield pretty consistent?
So currently, the oldest trees that we have, well, we've got a couple trees that are maybe 65 years old. We've got an orchard that's about 50 years old. That's our largest kind of contiguous orchard, or oldest contiguous orchard currently in production. Those trees are all still producing, like they haven't aged out or anything. I'm not sure what the age limit is for a Chinese chestnut tree to produce. We haven't found it yet.
Okay.
So we're still getting there. As far as fertilizer or vigor affecting production, chestnuts are really different than fruit trees in that they actually produce on the New Year's wood and like the most vigorous shoots. And so actually stimulating chestnut tree growth can also stimulate production. So having a really vigorous tree will actually give you more production sooner than a more stunted tree.
Okay. So here's a question. Hybrid hazelnuts are starting to become available that are resistant to eastern filbert blight. Maybe you could, let's see if you can answer this. Maybe not. And are apparently are more marketable than native hazelnuts. Do you see potential for these? Are
Yes.
hazelnuts fair question for you?
Yep, absolutely. And I totally agree. I think there's a lot of opportunity for hazels, and we actually grow some hazels as well. They're mostly the Native American hazels, and it's sort of a hobby at the moment. But I think that there's definitely market potential for hazels in our region.
So Rick asked the question, and he said, what is your preference on grafted versus seedling Chinese?
Yeah, this is another common question and one that you'll find mixed messages online. So almost all of our production comes from seedling trees. And in our experience and in the experience of other growers who have been doing this for a long time, seedling orchards are much more reliable and much more productive than grafted tree orchards. If you're just comparing maybe one tree to another tree, a grafted tree might seem favorable, but if you're looking at the whole orchard, and in fact, we have grafted trees and seedlings side by side in the same site, and the seedling trees are much more productive and growing much better. So we prefer seedling trees for culinary nut production.
Okay. I hadn't thought of this one. Steve asks, has there been any research? Oh, Amy's frozen. I think you're still there, correct?
Can you see me now? My back?
Well, you're half back. Your voice is back, so you're here. And we'll just proceed. It's okay.
Okay.
So Amy, has there been any research on uses for the chestnut burrs, such as biomass? And then how important is it to remove the burrs from the orchard for the health of the orchard?
It's an interesting question because of all the parts of the chestnut tree, the burrs are the only thing that we've never actually sold. Yes. So there's no market that I know of for chestnut burrs. They're not very dense. They're not very, once the nuts have fallen out of them and the burrs have fallen from the trees, they're not very nutritious. So as far as like a biomass type of thing, there's really not much there. It's, if someone can come up with something, that'd be wonderful. We don't remove them from the orchard. They do break down pretty well from one season to another. We have a lot of really healthy understory vegetation that grows all summer. Like we usually don't mow during the summer. So the burrs decompose really quickly when all the understory vegetation grows. So we don't remove them. And I see no evidence that you would need to.
Interesting. Hey, do you use tarps or to catch seeds, or just let them fall to the ground?
We just let them fall. I have seen different tarp and like olive type harvesters that people use for individual trees. It's not really feasible for us on such a large scale. So you got 20 contiguous acres of chestnut trees. Tarps are not really, it's just logistically too difficult. So we just let them fall to the ground and pick them up off the ground. I'm sure you could design an orchard with a tarp system in mind, but it's really not practical for us.
Okay, all right. Oh, audience, I want to say, the questions are just coming over the transom. It's great. Amy, if you're okay, can I ask a few more?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So are chestnut trees and apple trees compatible? Arthur asked this question.
As far as like site requirements, yes. I mean, I'm assuming maybe he's thinking that, about like in the same area, not necessarily interplanted, because I think interplanting is not a good idea. But, if you were to have like, chestnuts on this side of the field and apples on that side of the field, yeah, that's fine. I have apples planted by my chestnut trees. And the site, the site requirements are about the same. There are, not too many issues with crossover pests or diseases.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All good. So here's a question. So I hear so much about site selection and soil pH. I was told that the limestone here on my property in Virginia would not allow the chestnut trees to grow. However, in the very old deeds back to the 1800s of the property, I see that chestnut trees were here. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, an old forest is really different than the ground that we're dealing with right now. And all of us in the eastern US have this issue, right? Like whatever the primordial forest was before it was cleared, it had very different ecosystem dynamics than we have now. So, when those old chestnut trees that were there were established, yeah, I'm not sure what kind of site conditions they established under, but if you're trying to plant onto limestone at the moment, you're going to struggle. And that's not to say, check the pH. There are anomalies.
Okay.
But yeah, I just think the forest, the older forest that developed is very different than the forest that's developing now.
Okay. Are your orchards, Steve asks, are your orchards fenced to keep deer out?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. It took us many, many years to finally put up a deer fence because a good woven wire deer fence is really expensive. And so, the kind of like weren't sure about justifying the cost, but it is worth it. It is absolutely worth it. In fact, I would encourage everyone, if you're going to plant a chestnut orchard, put a deer fence around it. The deer can eat at least 30% of the crop on any given year.
Wow.
When you're establishing your young trees, they can eat the tips. Bucks can rub on the young trees. I mean, they really wreak havoc on the chestnut trees. And then if you have a fenced orchard, when you're harvesting, and especially if you're harvesting, well, either by hand or by machine, not having deer poop in the orchard makes a really big difference, both from like a personal comfort and like a food safety point of view.
Oh, the poop factor. Yes. Okay. You may have answered this, but I'm going to ask it. How long does it typically take newly planted trees to produce a sellable nut?
So when we plant seedlings, we expect them to start producing around age 5, 5 to 7. Ages 8 to 10, we expect them to really start producing reliably. And so it's, 10 and up, we feel confident about, but those first 10 years, there's a lot of variability. Some trees will produce sooner than others, but that 5 to 10 year window is kind of when it begins.
Okay. So one of the people on our board who maintains a fantastic orchard of pure American trees wants to know, do you keep your orchard well mowed? I'm sorry, that's a hard word for me.
Yeah. We don't. Oh, so, well, I guess let me back up. When it comes to young trees, when it comes to establishing a young orchard and planting young trees, grass competition can be really intense, and it's important to minimize grass competition at that point in time. But once the trees are well established, it's not really an issue. And we actually just let the grass grow. So in our older production orchards, we let the grass grow all summer, and we mow twice. We'll mow like late August, and then we'll mow again just before harvest, a nice golf course, finish, so that the nuts are really easy to harvest. So the orchard goes from just like a total weed patch with giant 5 foot tall grass, in the beginning of August, to like a golf course in late in September.
Another source of income.
Yeah, possibly.
So speaking of income, Terry asked this question, what kind of income can you expect from an acre? You said it takes 10 years to production, but what kind of assumptions would they make?
Yeah, we typically, well, we can see like with Chinese seedlings, like the material that we're working with, we can see 3,000 pounds to the acre.
Okay.
Some growers like on the West Coast that are working with other material claim more than that. But as far as like a comfortable, East Coast amount, 3,000 pounds to the acre is a reasonable amount to estimate. And we're selling chestnuts for $4.50 a pound, so you can do the math there.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. So do you do any pruning? And if yes, what is there a protocol?
We prune infrequently, but we do prune. So like I mentioned earlier, chestnuts produce on the growing shoots, and so we really want that vigorous growth. We don't really prune them back. Mostly we just prune them up, and that helps us get our equipment through the orchard. So we'll take we want the trees to be branchy, but we also want to be able to get through the orchard and move easily and move our equipment easily. So every few years we'll go through and just kind of cut off the lower limbs. We might clean up if there's like a double trunk. We might pick one that looks better than the other. We have a few guidelines, but it's kind of situationally dependent. There's not like one rule that one size fits all for pruning.
So I never really thought about this, but so with a Chinese chestnut that falls out of the burr, you don't care if the tree just keeps going up and up and up.
Nope.
Yeah.
The only issue, I will say, is with spraying, because at least so far we've done all our spraying from the ground. We have an air blast sprayer at the back of the tractor. So right. If the trees get too tall, then the spraying becomes an issue. We can't actually reach the tops of the trees. So our weevil control has suffered in recent years because some of our trees are too big. So that is one word of caution for tall trees. But other than that, as far as like actual nut production, the size, a tree can keep going, and that's fine.
What do you do with trees when they die?
Well, we burn quite a lot of firewood. So if they die naturally, like from something like oak wilt, or if they're killed prematurely, we'll mostly just we'll cut saw log. We'll cut saw logs if we have them. Burn firewood. I've cut fresh chestnut wood and used it for like mushroom logs. Other types of uses like that. I think there's a lot of potential for the Chinese chestnut wood that's kind of untapped at the moment.
Okay, excellent. Okay, that's the questions.
All right.
And nice job in terms of rapid fire, but good comprehensive answers. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Great questions.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I really like how on point they were. So we've reached the end of today's session. Thank you, Amy, for sharing your incredible experience and insight. Join us each day this week at noon and at 7 o'clock on Thursday night for a discussion about all things chestnut. Here's what's next. Tomorrow at noon, we'll hear from Dr. William Powell, who has developed a blight-tolerant chestnut tree that really could change everything. On Thursday at noon, TACF's Sarah Fitzsimmons will discuss silvicultural aspects and restoration of the American chestnut. And then we'll be hearing from another chestnut farmer, one of your colleagues, Amy, Roger Blackwell, who's the president of the Chestnut Growers of America. That'll be at 7 p.m. And then on Friday, the wrap up will be Lake Grabowski discussing finding American chestnuts in the wild, which is like, it's like a treasure hunt. So on behalf of the Pennsylvania, New Jersey chapter of the American Chestnut Foundation, we appreciate all your interest, support, and the really good questions tonight. More information is available at www.panjtacf.org. And thank you, and we hope you will consider joining with us to save and restore the American chestnut. Good night.